The twin suns burned above the open arena, shining over thousands of alien eyes. They had all come to see one thing, a test between species. On one side stood Lady Zirel, noblewoman of the Sarathi Empire, tall, proud, and dressed in glowing armor. Her skin shimmered like polished stone, her silver hair tied in a perfect braid. She was famous across her world for strength and control. She believed no species matched the Sarathi in power or honor, but then she saw the human. He didn't look special, wearing dusty clothes, hands rough from labor, and eyes calm like still water. His name was Raiden, and he had never trained in the grand halls of warriors. He worked at a construction site nearby. Just another human with quiet eyes and a tired back. Lady Zirel had seen him weeks ago, lifting a broken metal beam to save a child. He didn't shout, didn't ask for praise, he just acted. That memory stayed in her mind. It bothered her. How could a human show such strength without pride? So she called for the challenge of endurance, a public test of strength and pain. To show the galaxy who truly was superior, Raiden was chosen by his people. Or maybe he just agreed, no one knew for sure. He stood there now, silent, staring. A head not blinking human, Lady Zirel said, her voice sharp like a blade. This test is sacred, not a game. Raiden nodded once, not speaking a word. The crowd laughed, mostly Sarathi nobles. This will be short, someone shouted. He will fall after the first round. A loud horn echoed across the arena. The challenge had begun. The first test was weight hold. Both competitors had to lift 2 massive metal bars and hold them above their heads. No bending, no rest, just hold. Raiden picked up his bar slowly, his arm steady. Lady Zirel lifted hers quickly, full of confidence, her armor glowing under the sun. At first she smiled. He looked so still, so slow. She thought he was already close to giving up. But minutes passed, and he didn't move. His eyes didn't blink, his legs didn't shake. Lady Zirel's muscles started to feel tight. She adjusted her grip, then again. She glanced sideways. He was still holding. His face was calm, like he was thinking about something far away. What is this? She thought. He is not even trained. Sweat started to form under her armor. Raiden's arms trembled slightly, but he didn't lower them. The audience went quiet. The second test came. Stone push. A heavy block had to be pushed across rough ground. Zirel took a deep breath, gritting her teeth. She pushed, her boots digging into the sand. Raiden stepped forward, hands on the block, and pushed without sound. Side by side they moved. Inch by inch, meter by meter. The noblewoman's breath became louder, rougher. Her arms were starting to burn. Raiden didn't speak, didn't look at her. He just kept moving, slow but steady, his face now covered in sweat, his shirt sticking to his back. But his eyes never lost focus. The final test of the day was pain resistance. Both had to hold glowing rods made of hot energy, designed to burn without leaving scars. Zirel hesitated. Even she had never passed this part without screaming, but she saw him pick up the rod with both hands. He winced but didn't drop it. She picked hers too. The pain was instant. She gasped, not from fear, but shock, because he was still holding it, breathing through the pain. He didn't cry out, didn't break. Her pride flared. I am Sarathi, nobility, she told herself. I will not lose. But her palms burned, her arms trembled, and still, he stood there, silent. The horn sounded again. The test was over. They dropped the rods at the same time, both breathing heavy. The crowd was silent, unsure what they had just witnessed. Lady Zirel looked at Raiden. His hands were red, his shoulders shaking slightly, but he bowed his head toward her, not in shame, but in respect. She stared at him for a long time, then whispered under her breath, I can barely handle it, but I won't give up. It was only the beginning. The morning after the first trial, Lady Zirel sat alone in her meditation chamber. Her body ached in ways she didn't expect. Her arms felt heavy, Her palms still stung from the burning rods. But it wasn't the pain that disturbed her the most. It was the human, Raiden, the quiet one, had stood against her in full strength. He had no armor, no noble blood, no genetic enhancements. Yet he didn't fall. He didn't even speak. He just endured. She clenched her fists, trying to understand. Why didn't he break? She whispered. The silence answered her, cold and quiet. Later that day, the second round began. The arena had changed. The stage was smaller now, the air filled with heat. Massive stones glowed red from energy coils. The challenge was heat endurance. Each competitor had to carry a heavy stone across a long metallic path. Bare hands only, no brakes. Once started, you could not drop the stone or lose the round. The crowd was louder today. News had spread across the city. Did you hear? The human stood against the noble. Maybe they're stronger than we thought. No way, and today she'll crush him. Lady Zirel walked in first, her face calm but her heart racing. She wore light battle robes this time, less armor, more movement. Her silver hair was tied tighter than usual, like she needed it to keep her mind focused. Raiden arrived a moment later. Same clothes, same silence. He nodded once toward her. No smile, no fear, just respect. They stood before the burning stones. The signal flashed, and both reached out at the same time. Zirel's fingers touched the surface and sizzled at once. A sharp breath escaped her lips, but she grabbed it fully. Raiden did the same, lifting the stone like it was nothing more than a box of tools. The weight pressed into their arms, the heat rose into their bones, and they began to walk. Step after step, the heat grew stronger. The metal beneath their feet burned with every step. The stone felt like fire made solid. 10 steps in, Zirel's hands began to tremble. 20 steps. She bit her tongue to stop a cry from escaping. 30 steps, her legs started to slow. She looked to her side. Raiden was still walking, slower now but steady. His face was tight with pain, jaw clenched, sweat falling like rain from his chin. But he didn't drop the stone. What are you made of? She thought. Why aren't you stopping? Her legs buckled slightly. The stone dipped for half a second. Pain shot through her arms into her spine. The crowd gasped. She forced herself upright, her eyes locked forward. No, she whispered. I will not give up, she thought of her childhood. The cold halls of the Sarathi Palace, her father teaching her to lift ceremonial weights before she could even speak properly. Pain is the wall, he used to say. Push through it, or die weak, but now, here she was almost falling, while the human, with no palace, no teachers, kept moving like a silent machine. Another step, another burst of heat. Her hands were shaking now, small tremors turning into violent spasms. She clenched her teeth, so hard it hurt her jaw. She felt something inside her crack, not bone, not muscle, but pride. Then she heard something, a soft sound, like breath, like wind. She turned her head slightly and saw Raiden, still walking, but now. He was shaking too. His arms were trembling, his knees bending slightly. He was in pain too. Just like her, but he didn't stop and neither did she. Together, step by step, they reached the end. The stones were placed down with a heavy thud. Smoke rose from their hands, their skin red and raw, and the crowd stood up and clapped, not cheering one side but honoring both. Lady Zirel looked at Raiden again, this time with new eyes, not as a human challenger, not as a rival, but as someone who understood her pain. He looked back, didn't say a word, but gave a small nod, not of victory, but of recognition. As the healers rushed in to treat their hands, one of Zirel's guards whispered, "Your Grace, you should have won that round easily." She didn't answer right away. She stared at her shaking fingers. The skin blistered and burned. And then she said softly, "He should have fallen, but he didn't." Then she looked toward the stars and added, "And neither did I." The second challenge was over, but something inside her had changed. Her hands were shaking, not just from pain, but from something deeper. Something new. Lady Zarel sat by the glowing window of her chamber. Her hands were bandaged, her skin treated with healing gel. But even as the pain faded from her body, the storm inside her heart only grew stronger. She closed her eyes, and the past came rushing. Back a palace hallway lined with silver pillars, her father standing tall with his arms crossed, cold eyes watching as she failed to lift the ceremonial blade. "You are weak," he had said. "You are noble by blood, not by strength." That was the first time she cried, and the last time she allowed herself to. From that day she trained harder than anyone. She crushed every test, passed every trial, and learned to wear pride like armor. She never showed pain, never bent, never let her hands shake. Until now, the human, Raiden, had shown her something she didn't understand. He wasn't faster, he wasn't stronger, but he refused to fall. He fought pain with silence, with memory, with something she couldn't name. "Why does this shake me so much?" she thought. "Why do I keep thinking about his eyes? Calm and tired, but focused." There was a knock at the door. Her attendant, a young Sarathi girl named Velia, entered with fresh clothes. "Your Grace, the third challenge begins at first. Light," she said gently. "Are you sure you want to continue?" Zarel didn't answer at first. Then she looked at her own reflection in the glass. "I was raised to win," she said slowly. "But now I wonder what that even means." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed and stared at her bandaged hands, and she thought of Raiden. Again, what pushed him? Why did a man with no fame, no rank, no armor, stand taller than a noble? Was it pain? No, it was something else. Morning came fast. The third trial was called the Pillars of Pressure. It was a mental and physical challenge. Stand between two massive gravity walls. The force increased every minute. If you fell, you failed. The trial could last minutes or hours. The arena was smaller today, only the strongest came to watch. Those who understood how the mind could break long before the body. Zarel and Raiden stepped forward. They stood between the glowing pillars, a few feet apart. No words, no greetings, just shared silence. The energy pulsed and the gravity began to press down. At first it was light, like carrying a heavy bag. Then it pressed harder. Shoulders sank, knees bent, breathing slowed. Zarel focused on her breathing. In, out, steady and sharp. She remembered her father's voice. "If your mind is weak, your body is useless." But suddenly, that voice felt like a chain, not a guide. She looked at Raiden. He was still standing, breathing slow, his eyes closed. Was he meditating? Praying? She didn't know. She turned her eyes inward again, and memories came flooding in. Moments she tried to forget. She remembered standing before the Sarathi Council after her first real combat loss. They had called her a failure, a disappointment. Even though she had saved lives, they didn't care about why, only that she didn't win. She had bowed her head, swallowed the shame, and trained harder, but deep inside, she had felt broken. Now, under the crushing pressure of the pillars, that feeling returned. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear the challenge apart, but then she opened her eyes again and saw him, Raiden, still standing, still breathing, still refusing to fall, and suddenly she realized he wasn't just fighting gravity, he was fighting his past, just like her. That's it, she thought. That's the secret. He fights not for pride, but for something deeper. Maybe pain, maybe loss, but it gives him power. Her legs shook, her arms felt like stone, but she straightened her back and whispered, "I am not just noble by blood, I must earn it." Minutes passed, maybe hours. No one moved, not even the wind, just two beings. One alien, one human, standing between crushing walls, fighting their own ghosts. At last, the pillars dimmed. The trial was complete. Both competitors were still standing. The crowd erupted, not in noise but in stunned silence. Lady Zarel fell to her knees, not from failure, but from relief. Raiden offered a hand. She looked up, and for the first time in her life, she took it. He pulled her to her feet, then nodded once. Still no words, still no pride, just strength. And in that moment, Zarel understood something. Winning wasn't about breaking others. It was about surviving your own brokenness and rising anyway. The third trial had ended, but inside Lady Zarel something had just begun, a quiet storm that whispered questions she had never dared to ask. That evening, as the twin moons rose over the mountain peaks, she stood alone in the training yard of her guest quarters. Her hands were still sore, her muscles tight, but her thoughts were louder than the pain. Why did he help me stand? She thought. Why do I keep remembering his silence? All her life, victory meant one thing: domination. To win was to crush, to command, to break the other. But Raiden didn't act like a conqueror. He never even raised his voice, and yet, she remembered his hand pulling her up, strong, steady, humble, and for the first time she didn't feel insulted, she felt seen. Suddenly her old pride didn't feel like armor, it felt like a cage. The next morning brought the fourth trial. It was called the Drag of Judgment, a brutal test, ancient and rarely used. Each competitor would pull a heavy sled across a jagged stone path barefoot. Bleeding was expected, quitting was common. Zarel stood at the starting line. The sled behind her weighed more than a cargo ship door. Sharp black stones lined the long path ahead. She took a breath and glanced sideways. Raiden was already there. No armor, no boots, just cloth wraps around his feet and a quiet expression. Like always, he said nothing. But his eyes held fire. The signal was given. Zarel stepped forward, the chains pulling tight. The sled didn't move at first. She dug her heels in, grit her teeth, and pulled. The first step sliced her foot. She didn't cry out. The second step burned worse still. She kept going. Beside her, Raiden moved as well. His sled dragged slowly, cutting through the path like a scar. His feet left trails of blood, but he never paused. Zarel's heart pounded. Pain roared through her legs and up her spine, but she kept moving. Then, a memory returned. Her training years. Her uncle, a cruel general, once tied a weight to her ankle and forced her to walk through ice. Royalty must not feel pain, he shouted. Pain is for the weak. She had believed him, believed that strength meant silence and pride meant never bending. But now she was bleeding, she was struggling, and the human, the one they called weak, was still walking beside her. She stumbled, falling to one knee. Her hands slammed into the stones, scraping raw. Blood ran down her shins. The crowd leaned in, waiting for her to collapse. But she didn't fall alone. Raiden paused, turned, and looked back. He didn't offer words, just a long, steady look. Not pity, not pride, just understanding. Zarel forced herself up. Grit filled her voice as she muttered, I am noble. But I'm also tired. She pulled the chain again. The sled moved forward. Her feet throbbed. Her breath came ragged. But her pride, the kind she was raised with, cracked just a little, and in the cracks, something new began to grow. Empathy, respect, courage not to stand above, but to stand with. The finish line came into view. Raiden reached it seconds before her, but he didn't celebrate, didn't raise his arms. He just stopped and turned. To watch her arrive, Zarel crossed the line with shaking legs. The crowd gave a slow, respectful cheer. Even the Sarathi nobles, once cold, stood to acknowledge her effort. She fell to her knees again. But this time, it wasn't weakness, it was release. She looked up at Raiden, her voice soft, broken. Why do you do this? She asked. You have nothing to prove. He looked at her. Then finally, he spoke. I've already lost more than I can explain, he said quietly. I don't do this to win. I do it to remember who I am. Those words hit harder than any stone. Zarel's eyes burned, not from dust, but from truth. She realized she wasn't really fighting Raiden. She had been fighting herself, fighting years of cold lessons of being told that showing pain was failure, that emotion was weakness, that nobility came only from bloodlines, not choices, but Raiden had no royal title, no medals, and still, he stood tall. That night Zarel didn't sleep. She sat under the stars, barefoot, feet still bandaged, and whispered, "I was taught to walk alone. But now I see. True strength comes when you walk beside someone." And for the first time, she felt free. The next morning was silent. The usual noise of crowds and fanfare had faded. Word had spread through the city, not just about the trials, but about what had changed between them. Lady Zarel and Raiden, once seen as rivals, were now seen as something else, two warriors from different worlds connected not by war, but by struggle. The fifth trial was simple in name but brutal in nature. It was called the Hold of Time. Each challenger would carry another on their back, across a long path filled with shifting platforms and wind bursts. It tested strength, balance, and most of all, trust. Usually the challenger would carry a chosen assistant, but this time, something unexpected happened. As Zarel stepped into the arena, she turned toward Raiden, then spoke loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I choose him," she said, pointing directly at him. Gasps echoed across the stone seats. Raiden blinked. Surprised for the first time, he looked at her. Not with confusion, but with quiet understanding, she walked to him, her voice low now. "If I want to understand your strength," she whispered, "I must carry it." He gave a small nod. No words, just calm agreement. Zarel knelt her back to him. Raiden stepped forward and carefully climbed on. He wasn't heavy, but the meaning behind his weight pressed into her heart like a mountain. The trial began. The wind roared. The platforms shifted beneath her feet. One wrong step, and both would fall into the safety net below. But fail the trial. Zarel moved slowly, her feet finding balance. Her legs still hurt from the last challenge, and her arms trembled with every motion, but she kept moving. She remembered her father again. "Never carry another," he once told her. "Let others serve you, never bend for the weak." But now, she was bending, carrying a human, and it didn't make her feel weak. It made her feel real. Raiden didn't speak, didn't move. He simply placed his hands lightly on her shoulders as if to say, "I trust you." Halfway through, the wind grew stronger. A platform shifted under her foot. She slipped, just a little. But a sharp jolt of pain shot up her back. She cried out, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft sound of truth. The crowd tensed, watching. Raiden didn't panic. He leaned forward slightly, not to control, but to support. His weight shifted gently, helping her find balance again. It was subtle, but it changed everything. She moved again, slower now, more aware of each step. More aware of the trust on her back. By the time she reached the final stretch, her legs were shaking, her breath sharp and uneven. Her body screamed to stop, but her heart was still steady. She stepped onto the last platform, dropped to her knees, and let Raiden step down. The arena was silent, and then the applause came, not just from humans, not just from Sarathi, but from everyone. This wasn't a challenge anymore. It had become something greater, a lesson no one expected. Zarel stood up, swaying slightly. Raiden placed a hand on her arm, just to steady her. Nothing more. No pride. No celebration. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you understand what you've done?" He looked at her with quiet eyes and said, "You carried me. But the truth is, we carried each other." She almost smiled, but something caught in her throat, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Humility. Later, back in her quarters, she removed her armor. Her shoulders were red and bruised, her feet swollen and sore. She sat beside the mirror and stared at herself. For the first time, she didn't see a flawless noblewoman. She saw a warrior who had bled, broken, and learned. And strangely, she liked that version of herself more. She picked up her datapad and opened a blank message to her royal house, but she didn't type. She just stared at the blinking cursor. Then she whispered to the quiet room, "I thought strength was standing, alone. But now I see, strength is letting someone help carry the weight." And that was the lesson no one had spoken. but everyone had learned. The night was quiet. No sound of cheering crowds, no flashing lights, only the soft hum of the city's sky lanterns floating above. Lady Ziril sat near a fire in the courtyard of her guest quarters, wrapped in a simple robe, no armor, no title, just herself. Her body still hurt from the trials. Her feet were bandaged, her back sore, but inside her chest, something strange was blooming. A feeling she had no words for. Peace, maybe, or something close to it. Across from her, sitting on a wooden bench, was Raiden. He wore the same plain clothes, but under the firelight, he looked different. Not like a competitor, but like someone familiar. They sat in silence for a while. Neither of them needed to speak. The silence was no longer awkward. It was comforting, like two people sharing the same sky. Ziril finally broke the silence. "Why don't you speak much?" she asked gently, her voice no longer sharp, just curious. Raiden looked at the fire, then shrugged lightly. "Words get in the way sometimes," he said. "I've learned that actions say more." Ziril smiled faintly. "You're right," she said. "I've spoken too much in my life, and listened too little." Raiden didn't reply, but his calm expression said, "I understand." She picked up a small stone from the ground, turning it in her hand. "When I first came here," she said slowly, "I thought I was going to crush you. I thought humans were soft, too emotional, too fragile." Raiden raised one eyebrow but said nothing. Ziril continued, "But you never needed to roar. You never tried to win by force. You simply stood." She looked at him. "And because of that, I broke in ways I didn't know were possible." Raiden finally smiled, just a little, and then said something she never expected. "You didn't break. You opened." Her eyes widened. Something about that sentence went straight into her chest like a spark. She wasn't defeated, she had been changed. The next day, no trial was planned. It was a day of rest before the final challenge. But Ziril did something no noble Sarathi had ever done. She invited Raiden to her ship not as a rival but as a guest. The inside of her vessel was clean, cold and full of gold and silver walls, a symbol of her royal bloodline. Raiden looked around with quiet interest, but didn't comment on the luxury. She walked beside him, showing him the memory halls. Rooms filled with holograms of past battles, victories, and royal ceremonies. Each one showed her face, standing tall and proud, but to her surprise, none of them made her feel proud anymore. They passed a wall with a large image of her father. Ziril paused. "He taught me to win," she said quietly. "But he never taught me what to do after winning." Raiden looked at the hologram, then turned to her. "Maybe that's something you'll teach others," he said. Later, she brought him to the sparring chamber. Instead of weapons, she handed him a cup of warm tea. They sat in the middle of the floor, two fighters sharing something far more powerful than battle. Understanding, Ziril told him about her mother, about how she was strong yet never allowed to speak in court, about how Ziril swore to become even stronger, to never be ignored, to never be silent. Raiden listened, never interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Maybe you became strong for the wrong reason," he said. "But now, you're using that strength for the right one." That night, Ziril stood in her private quarters, looking at her reflection. She wore no makeup, no armor, no badge of rank, just her, raw, tired, and real. And for the first time in her life, she liked what she saw. She opened her personal message log and recorded a new entry. Not for her father, not for the council, but for the young warriors of her people. Her voice was soft, steady. "If you wish to be strong," she said, "don't chase pride. Don't chase power. Chase truth, chase pain. Chase the moments that make you feel small, because those are the ones that help you grow. Strength," she whispered, "is not in the scream, but in the silence that refuses to fall." She ended the message and sat down. Outside, the sky was dark, but in her heart, a new light had begun to rise. The noblewoman had changed, not by losing, but by learning what strength really meant, and beside her, always quiet, was the man who had shown her without ever trying. The final trial was here. But the crowd that gathered today didn't come just to watch a competition. They came to witness a story that had changed the hearts of two very different worlds. The sky above the arena was soft gray. The wind carried no cheers, just quiet anticipation. No one knew what this last trial would bring, not even Lady Zyril or Raiden. The council had kept the final test a secret. All that was announced was one name, the Trial of Truth. Zyril arrived wearing a simple tunic, no armor, no glowing crown, only a cloth wrap over her shoulders and the mark of her house across her back. But today, that title felt lighter. Raiden stood already in the center of the arena, waiting, still and quiet, like always. He didn't need an entrance. His presence was enough. A tall Sarathi judge stepped forward. With a voice that echoed through the stone walls, he said, "For the final trial there will be no weapons, no machines, no fire, no weight, only words." Zyril raised her head, surprised. Words? That was something she had once used too often, without meaning. The judge turned to her first. "You will speak your truth," he said, to him and to all. She stood silently for a moment, the eyes of her people and the humans, all upon her. Then she stepped forward and looked at Raiden. "I was taught that humans were weak," she began. "I was raised to see you as soft, emotional, unpredictable. I believed strength came only through victory, through bloodline, through control." Her voice shook slightly, but she didn't stop. "But then I met you," she said, "and I saw strength deeper than any power I'd ever known. You did not try to defeat me. You simply endured. And in doing so, you helped me see myself." She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. "You carried my pain, without even touching it. You showed me what it means to stand not above others, but with them." She turned slightly to the crowd. "I am no longer just your noblewoman," she declared. "I am your sister in struggle, your student in truth. And today I bow, not in defeat, but in honor." She turned back to Raiden, then lowered herself to one knee. The entire arena went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Raiden stepped forward, no words, just his hand reaching out, lifting her back to her feet. Then the judge turned to him. "Now you," he said, "speak your truth." Raiden looked around at the Sarathi, then at the humans watching from the edges, then finally at Zyril. "I didn't come here to win," he said softly. "I came because someone believed I couldn't. And I wanted to prove, not to them but to myself, that I still had something left." He paused, eyes dark with memory. "I lost my sister 2 years ago," he said. "She was stronger than me, braver than me. She saved people in a fire and didn't make it out. My silence," he added, "was never strength. It was grief." Zyril's eyes widened. The crowd leaned in, listening to every word. "But through this trial," Raiden continued, "I learned something too. That strength is not about hiding pain. It's about sharing it without shame." He looked at Zyril. "You gave me back something I lost, not my strength, but my purpose." The judge raised a hand. "The trial is complete," he said. "No winner will be named because none is needed, only truth remains." The crowd stood, and for the first time in history both Sarathi and humans clapped, together, not for victory, but for growth. Later that evening, Zyril stood beside Raiden at the edge of a balcony. Below them, lights danced, music played softly. Peace had settled where pride once ruled. "I'm returning home tomorrow," she said, "to speak before the High Council." Raiden nodded. "Think they'll listen?" he asked. Zyril smiled. "They'll have no choice," she replied, "because I won't speak as a noble. I'll speak as someone who knows what strength really is." She turned to him, her voice low. "You could come with me." Raiden looked at the stars, then at her. "Maybe," he said. But even if I don't, I'll be with you in the message you carry." She reached out, gently touching his hand. "Then let that be our legacy," she whispered. "Not the strength to rule, but the strength to understand." Above them, 2 stars crossed paths. A symbol, perhaps, of 2 worlds once apart. Now walking the same road, and somewhere deep inside the galaxy, a new story had begun, not of war, not of power, but of respect, of change, and of a noblewoman who bowed, only to rise higher than ever before.